Let's begin with the latest coming in on Russia. Tightening its grip on regional politics, the ruling pro-Kremlin United Russia Party is set to claim a clear victory in local elections held on Sunday. Early official results showed pro-Kremlin politicians backed by Putin coasting to landslide wins. The opposition figure, Alexei Navalny's supporters, on the other hand, scored rare victories in city council votes. Two allies of Navalny won local parliament seats in the Siberian city of Tomsk, where he was allegedly poisoned last month. United Russia appeared to have lost its council majority in both the places. It was not immediately clear how Navalny's strategy had fared elsewhere, with votes still being counted. Now, Russia's regional election is being perceived as a dry run for the parliamentary election scheduled for 2021. The local election came weeks after Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny was allegedly poisoned. Before he fell seriously ill, Navalny had urged his supporters to vote against the political party tactically. Navalny had promoted a tactical voting strategy to hurt United Russia and fielded dozens of candidates for city councils in Siberia. Hence, amid frustrations over years of falling wages and the government's handling of the pandemic, the local election were closely watched for signs of protest voting against the party that backs President Vladimir Putin. For more details and a sense of perspective, I'm joined in by our correspondent Julia Chapman, who's joining me live from Moscow at this hour. Thank you for joining our broadcast at this hour, Julia. Now, the regional elections have been touted as a test of Putin's popularity. What are the early results indicating?
Well, we understand that the ruling United Russia Party has really swept most of these votes. They were voting in a number of regions of Russia for local councillors, for regional leaders, as well the local governors of a number, I believe 18 different regions of Russia. And on the whole, the United Russia Party did very well as other parties that sometimes back United Russia and vote along with them in parliament. However, there were a couple of spots, as you mentioned, where the results were very different, and those were namely Tomsk and Novosibirsk, two cities in Siberia where Alexei Navalny, the opposition activist, had been campaigning ahead of his alleged poisoning in August. And those two cities appear to be where United Russia has lost its majority in local councils, appearing to instead the city backing opposition figures as well as those who had been supported by the smart voting, tactical voting system that Navalny and his allies were putting forward.
Right. Julia, speaking of Alexei Navalny, has Alexei Navalny's suspected poisoning impacted the election results, especially in Siberia? Also, what about the protests in Khabarovsk?
It's difficult to know exactly how much these results have been influenced by the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Nevertheless, it's very likely that the investigations and the campaigning that he was involved in ahead of these votes did certainly have an impact. We've seen these two cities, Tomsk and Novosibirsk, with starkly different results to many of the other areas of Russia. There was one other city in Russia that also saw the United Russia Party lose its majority, and that was in Tambov in southern central Russia. But nevertheless, the results in Tomsk and Novosibirsk were very surprising, and they do certainly suggest that people in those regions have been paying attention to the campaigning that's been carried out by Alexei Navalny and his supporters. Indeed, after he'd already been flown to Germany for further medical treatment when he was still in a coma, his team released investigations into local officials in both of those cities, and they appear to have had some impact on the results, having overturned the majorities of United Russia Party in both those councils.
Right. Julia, from economy to the handling of the COVID crisis, what have been the challenges for the Kremlin during this election?
Well, there have been a number of challenges, of course. This year has been a difficult one, and the party and President Putin himself have seen trust levels falling. However, they have somewhat recovered as the year goes on, as Russia emerged from lockdown and life really has returned to normal in most parts of the country despite the COVID-19 pandemic, and despite the fact that the country is in fact reporting more than 5,000 new cases of coronavirus every day, a number that's ticked up slightly in the last couple of months. But nevertheless, there have been huge political and economic challenges in Russia this year. Russia did not offer as much economic support to its citizens when the lockdowns began here in Moscow, we were in lockdown for 9 weeks. Many businesses had to close for that period. And there have been criticisms that the economic support didn't go far enough. So that was certainly a test, although Moscow was not one of the areas that was voting in these local and regional elections. But across the country, it does seem that support for the ruling party remains pretty strong, despite all of the challenges that this country has faced this year.
I'm sure Monday the results to pour in today will throw more light on that. Julia, last but not the least, there are reports that real votes have been switched. What election irregularities have been reported so far?
We understand that the Central Election Commission has received upwards of 2,500 complaints about voting irregularities. Nevertheless, most of them have been dismissed. The Commission says that there are no serious violations of the election this time around, and they say that none of the violations that have been reported would have affected any of the results, so they are not carrying out investigations into them. But one interesting feature of this vote is, for the first time, a vote and an election has been held over a couple of days, and it was first trialed during the nationwide vote earlier this year when the constitution was changed by Russian voters. This is the first time they're voting now for elected officials over more than one day. This vote began on Friday and ended on Sunday, and it's been held over the course of a weekend to avoid crowding in polling stations to limit the spread of COVID-19. Now, election monitors such as Golos, one of the main independent monitors here in Russia, have certainly raised alarm bells about this approach. They say that allows for more electoral fraud because ballots can be stuffed overnight in between voting days. So there are serious concerns, and they have said that this was not a very fair and transparent vote. Nevertheless, the Central Election Commission does not appear to be terribly concerned and isn't looking into these irregularities.
Right, since investigations will not be called for, this certainly puts an end to that. But thank you so much, Julia, for bringing us all those latest inputs.